The big news of the week, if it's Brendan Sullivan, Iowa quarterback, now former Iowa quarterback Brendan Sullivan makes the news that he is entering the transfer portal. And I guess, Chris, my thought, let's start here. Not shocking, right, that Brendan Sullivan is entering the transfer portal. You brought in Mark Gronowski, who it is expected is going to be the starting quarterback for the Hawkeyes. He's a two-time FCS national champion, and probably the writing was on the wall that Brendan Sullivan was fighting for the backup quarterback job. So with that, Brendan Sullivan makes his decision to depart. I think he really did Iowa a solid here by sticking around as long as he did throughout the spring. I know that we've started to see a little bit of Mark Gronowski getting out there and getting loose, and though he's not completely padded up and taking hits and it's live on live, he's been able to learn a little bit from Brendan Sullivan and take some shell snaps, if you will, out there with Iowa throughout this spring. So I just say hats off to Brendan Sullivan, who was a valuable transfer portal addition for Iowa last spring into obviously last football season, and wish him well. I think that he's got a chance to go start somewhere else and probably help somebody out more than maybe he was going to as a backup quarterback for Iowa. But what were your reactions to Brendan Sullivan entering the transfer portal?
Like, same thing you said, man. I was not surprised. You know, when you bring excuse me, when you bring a guy in like Mark Gronowski, you know, as talented as he was, he could have chose to go to the NFL. He got invited to the combine and actually turned it down. He wanted to come back to college. So when you bring a guy in like that, you don't bring him in to bring him off the bench. You bring him in to start. And it is kind of sad to see him leave, you know, with the way he kind of Coach Ferentz kind of throwing him in here and there at the beginning of the season. We saw, you know, the dual threat ability he had, and Hawkeye fans got excited. Like I as a student felt that, and I talked to my friends about it. The reporters were saying, you know, everyone was excited about his skill set, and we all wanted him to play more. Then, unfortunately, Cade went down. It was in the Northwestern game, and I was actually there for that. He went down. Brendan Sullivan came in, you know, kind of to a standing ovation. People were excited to see, and we actually won it. 42-10. It might have been our best game, but you know, that was a kind of game where Hawkeye fans were excited for the future. And after the season, you know, everyone was excited. Everyone here is saying, okay, next year Brendan Sullivan is going to be the starter for sure. Kay's gone. Now we're going to get rolling. Now we're bringing a guy like Mark Gronowski. You look at his track record, what he's done. I mean, you can't help but to still be excited, but it's still upsetting to see Brendan Sullivan go, especially after what he did last year. I'm sure he's going to go to a great college, you know, make just as big of an impact here as he did, over there as he did here. But, you know, wherever he goes, he's going to make a good impact. And he's a good human, man. Talking to him behind the scenes, chill guy, just wants to play football, play his best ball. And, you know, anyone that gets him, you should be excited, man. But it's going to be a good year for Hawkeye football regardless.
Yeah, it obviously is, you know, I don't want to say upsetting news because you wish Brendan Sullivan well in his next stop, but that's somebody that you would have loved to have as a backup quarterback behind Gronowski, somebody that had starting experience coming into Iowa from Northwestern that, as you pointed out, Chris, came in and was great for Iowa versus Wisconsin, was 7 of 10 passing in that game for 93 yards. UCLA early at UCLA, you had one of those highlight moments where you thought, oh my goodness, we've been waiting for this. The Iowa Hawkeyes have unlocked the passing game, and it's in part because of Brendan Sullivan and his dual threat ability as well. The defense having to respect him, but obviously then he got his injury issues and Jackson Stratton came in, and though Brendan Sullivan maybe could have been under a different scenario minus Gronowski, I think he would have been the odds-on favorite to be the starting quarterback for Iowa and a solid Iowa starting quarterback. Obviously, it makes sense that he wants to move on and get a starting opportunity somewhere else. I guess, do you have any other big reactions to it? Does it tell you anything about how Mark Gronowski has impressed the coaching staff? Does it tell you anything about some of the new additions in the quarterback room for Iowa? Iowa went out and got Hank Brown from Auburn. That was a transfer portal addition. Last December as they were building up to the bowl game, Jimmy Sullivan's a signee in that quarterback room for Iowa. So do you feel better about the Iowa quarterback room that maybe Brendan Sullivan saw that he wasn't even going to be maybe the backup at Iowa?
You know, before Like I said, we expected this to happen. But beforehand, I was looking at the quarterback room, Mark Gronowski, Brandon Sullivan, and Hank Brown most likely being the top three. That is something to look forward to. But now that he's gone, you can still feel confident. Look, I mean, I get it. I mean, Brandon Sullivan was here. He did awesome. He gave Hawkeye fans a lot to be excited about because he was looking like he was going to be our best quarterback we've had in, a few years. He was going to live up to that.
We did have one more transfer portal departure that happened today. Now a couple of tight ends, Gavin Hoffman and Johnny Pascuzzi, the latest transfer portal departure. John Nestor among that group of recent Iowa Hawkeyes that have put their name into the transfer portal here, kind of, I guess, in the spring season, if you will, Chris. What do you make of those departures from the program for Iowa?
I'm not worried about the tight end room at all. There's a reason why we're named Tight End University. And, when you're a tight end and you think about NFL, you think about Iowa. That's what we're one of the best at producing tight ends, at developing tight ends. We still got Addison Ostrenga. He's a dog. Like, one of the guys that I want to see get more action is Zach Ortworth. I remember there was only one play last year. I remember it was Brandon Sullivan threw the pass. It was a 40-yard dime to Zach Ortworth. I believe he caught it over two people, I think. And when I saw that, even though it's just one play, it made me think of Tight End University, a guy that could that's one flash of what it could be in the future. Obviously, he's going to be limited by Addison Ostrenga. And, hopefully Addison Ostrenga is actually healthy throughout the whole year. But tight ends, never worry about it, Iowa. But John Nestor, though, you could be a little concerned about that just because, even though Iowa wasn't, the top 5 defense like we're used to being for, whatever reason, we had lapses last year where we struggled. That there's no question about it. And
secondary too, a big part of some of those struggles, the back end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but carry on.
100%. So when you lose a guy like him, that was going to kind of be a key to the defense. That's a big hit, and this year is going to be a year about the offense more than the defense, which is the first time in a while. So, you just got to rely on the Iowa system to develop guys and have them be ready to step in, which Kirk I would say, is pretty good at doing that. And portal's still open. There's always guys to look for. And, with Iowa having a reputation that they do on defense and developing guys getting into the league, you got to feel good about your chances above. If you are looking for a replacement, getting a good replacement for John Nestor, you got to feel good about it.
Yeah, I would think that Phil Parker can come on in and make a nice little sales pitch and just say, look, here's some guys, I don't know, maybe somebody intercepting a pass and running a pick 6 back in the Super Bowl versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Maybe you just flip on some of that tape from Cooper DeJean and say, do you want to be the next Coop? And go make a big bag of cash. Well, then why don't you come up to Iowa City? And I know a thing or two about coaching defensive backs. So I would imagine that Coach Phil Parker has a pretty good recruiting pitch, as good as anybody out there naturally, really for any position defensively, but obviously him being a secondaries coach, that being part of the specialty, then certainly a cornerback, he should have a good chance to go scoop somebody up out of the portal. That does, I think, kind of jump toward the front of the line, right, for maybe a position group that you'd like to address. TJ Hall, Deshaun Lee, we've seen good things at times. We've seen those guys get picked on out there at times. So cornerback to me is a pretty obvious position group that you look at and say, okay, if there's somebody out there that can step right in and help you, then by all means, absolutely go identify a cornerback and add them to this roster.
100%. The lapses on defense were pretty evident, especially with the receivers. When you talk about, TJ Hall and Deshaun Lee struggling, I think back to Ohio State. Like I said, I was there for that game, 8-hour drive, which is, I love driving, so it's not terrible. But, I watched Iowa make it a 7-0 game, still down, but 7-0 at halftime. And the first drive of that game, I watched Jeremiah Smith, outstanding freshman. He would be a top 5 pick in this year's draft alone. I see your face, Josh. Yes, he is, in my opinion, the best receiver in college football this year as a freshman. He would be a top 5 pick this year if he was a draft eligible. But I watched him on back-to-back plays go 54 yards down the field, get Ohio State to the 4-yard line, and then when he has a one-on-one out route on Deshaun Lee in the red zone, I isolated one-on-one, nobody else nearby. Jeremiah Smith did what the best receiver in college football would do. One-handed catch, didn't even bring it in, and I'm not saying that the better cornerbacks in the league will prevent that, but you could at least limit that. And, the size difference on Jeremiah Smith to Deshaun Lee is a big thing too. Deshaun Lee's not the biggest guy. He's a skilled guy, great player. But sometimes against those best receivers in the league, size matters. And if we want to get back to being a top 5 defense, you are going to have to look at some players to at least challenge Deshaun Lee to really step up his game and, just challenge him. Deshaun Lee has it in him, I believe. But, again, you could always be better. And that's what Kirk Ferentz, Phil Parker, and them are going to look for, is just to get better, no matter what they got to do. If they got to move Deshaun Lee off, they got to move TJ Hall off to bring someone else in, that's what they're going to do. But I believe it's only going to make them better, knowing that they have to get better, and it should motivate them.